Operators of Nord Stream, the network of the Baltic Sea pipelines that linked Russia and Germany until they both leaked last week, say authorities are not allowing them to inspect damaged pipelines, according to Reuters. So 3 pipelines in the Nord Stream network burst last week, and an act many, including President Biden, have called sabotage. Nord Stream 2 AG, the Switzerland-based operator of the pipeline, said it will examine the condition of the leaking pipelines once a police investigation of the crime scene is completed and cordon is lifted. Meanwhile, one of President Vladimir Putin's top allies said today the sabotage of Nord Stream, which Putin is claiming the West did, appears similar to the U.S. CIA-backed attacks on oil infrastructure in Nicaragua in 1983. Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev told the Interfax news agency, saying, "Let me remind you, a similar situation occurred in 1983. Joining us now to weigh in is senior fellow and military expert for defense priorities, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Wonderful to have you with us, Lieutenant Colonel.
Thanks, Robbie. Good to be here.
So I'm fascinated to hear what your take on all this is. For my part, I absolutely understand why people would wonder, would speculate about U.S. potential involvement in this, given the way some U.S. officials have framed the act of sabotage as some kind of opportunity, given our militaristic posturing toward Russia and given the very real history of U.S. Officials intervening in various other countries in sort of black ops senses having to do with all of those things. All of that said, it still kind of seems to me like Occam's razor, the most likely thing is in fact the most likely thing, actually does still point to Russia's involvement given everything that's going on. I guess maybe it's possible it was another European effort. I guess also maybe it's possible it was an accident, although sure doesn't look like it. Help us make sense of what's happened.
Yeah, I think that there's no question that this was not an accident. You can't have 3 simultaneous leaks on these pipelines when they've been there for years. And it was also recorded that there were underwater explosions. So it's very certain that someone sabotaged these pipelines. But you have to look at, forget about all the history and everything else for the moment, and just look who benefits and who is harmed by this. And I think that the least likely culprit would be Russia, because look, they already had full control of the pipeline. They could turn the taps on or off at will. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that they would want to blow their own pipelines up, which would then take the power out of their hands should they want to turn it back on for political reasons later. Now, there's certainly other people who may benefit from that, and, people can do their own assessments on that. And unfortunately, there is quite a history, as you point out, of things that we have done that, aren't exactly on the up and up. And the last point I'll make is that whoever did this has to be somebody with states level caliber of support, because, you have to either have submarine capacity or you have to have very deep diving capacity, and those are not something that just some random person can have. Right.
We can't just say it was maybe it was some random environmental group. They don't operate submarines.
Right.
Tell us about the effect this might have on Germany. I take to be the kind of big loser about what happened, relying on this as an energy source. This makes, the situation more dire for a country that is as an ally, as a partner of the United States.
Well, yeah, Germany is the biggest potential loser, but they're far from the only one, as so many in Europe are, opposed to or are damaged by the cutoff of the Russian gas. It's already a huge issue that's potentially going to plague the entire continent as the temperature continues to drop out here. But we actually are getting news. I literally 5 minutes before we went on air here, I saw a report that is actually reporting that there are 4 total pipelines that make up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 system, and apparently one of those is still functioning and operational. So it is possible that one of them could come back into operation later. But Germany is in a real pickle, because they're of course they're doing everything they can to mitigate the use of gas, to conserve, and they're trying to get LNG from the United States, from Qatar, and other locations. But look, LNG is substantially more expensive than any kind of pipeline gas. Like orders of magnitude more. And they also have a limitation on their port facilities. They can only take so much, even if they got all that they wanted. and it's going to be a tough time without that pipeline. And of course, as you know, on your show here, I've been many times advocating that we need to do everything we can to end this war for the good of the people of NATO, Germany in particular, and of course, our own national security.
We're talking lately, very frustratingly, about the increased risk of an actual nuclear confrontation. Do we have to worry that even the perception, let alone whether we actually did it, whether the U.S. is responsible or not, we're not going to know. It's not going to be proven for a long time, if ever. But is the perception that the U.S. could have been involved, does that raise the risk of nuclear attack, of Russia doing something, or of saying, well, U.S. has effectively declared war, something like that?
Well, on its own, on the surface of it, I don't think that really changes the dynamics at all, because there are plenty of dynamics that we do need to be very much worried about in terms of a nuclear escalation. Because look, I know everybody is, in the West is cheering on the Ukraine side, and they've made some extraordinary, just absolutely amazing military gains here in the last 5 or 6 weeks. But we have to be cautious and understand that there is a flip side to that. And if we go too far, and if Russia feels like it is its national security is at risk, or it's an existential threat to it, that's an avowedly given purpose that Putin has said they would use nuclear weapons. And so we have to understand we can't push too far, or we could spawn the very thing that the world, all of humanity would risk the most of, and that's a nuclear escalation. We simply cannot go down that path.
It was reported yesterday that the U.S. is planning to send a new $625 million package of weapons to Ukrainian forces. This includes ammo, howitzers. You probably can fill me in more on what the details of the weapons are. But this seems like a very significant contribution to Ukraine's ongoing efforts.
It actually is. Of the last 3 tranches, this one has the most actual combat power in it, because there are 4 additional HIMARS rocket launchers. There are 16 155 millimeter howitzers and 16 105 millimeter howitzers, and then of course lots of ammunition, as you pointed out there. But it's also indicative of what's not in the package, and there are no what's called ATACMS, which is their ultimate long-range rocket systems for the HIMARS systems, which means that they still aren't giving Ukraine the very long range that could reach into Russia, because Biden is really trying to thread the needle and not have this go escalation that could draw us into. Because if the U.S. provides weapons that actually strike Russian territory proper, that could cross a Putin red line that could draw us in, whether we want to or not. And we just can't play with that. We can help Ukraine defend itself, but for our national security interest and to keep this from going nuclear, we can't go too far.
Do you think there's any chance the U.S. administration is contemplating an end game here? Because it is true, as you mentioned, that Ukraine has now had a string of military victories. They've really pushed back Russian forces. When will it be time? Is it time? Will U.S. officials finally say, "Great, we're back. We have things back on the terms we want them," and now push for a peace deal?
Well, I've been advocating that from the first week of the war, and wish we'd have been doing a lot more of it. But unfortunately, we have to recognize what's going on in the militarily here. A lot of people are excited, like I said, about the Ukraine advances here. But look, this comes in the context that Russia has announced a mobilization. They've already had reportedly up to 200,000 already show up at their mobilization sites, and there are a lot of Russian troops en route right now to the battlefront there. So Ukraine is wisely trying to press as hard as they can in both the north and in the south to get as much territory as they can before the fall rains really stop the momentum and before the Russian reinforcements arrive. But the fact is, reinforcements are coming, and at some point these offensives are going to bog down, because they've also lost tons of people and equipment. And this war is a long way from going on. So the celebration is good today, but we need to understand that darker days are coming.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us today and putting these issues in perspective. We always appreciate your expertise.
Always my pleasure. Thanks, Robbie.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.